Welcome to The Mandatory, one of our first lives during the week. Thanks so much for rocking with us. If you already haven't liked the video, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Also follow us on our social media platforms. Brian, it was a pretty busy week in boxing because Canelo Alvarez was fighting John Ryder, and that was a fight that actually went the distance. I argued with you. I was like, there's no way it goes the distance. I think a lot of people's parlays probably got messed up in this one.
Mine did.
And yeah, mine did as well. I thought it would be between round 7 through 9, but it turns out that Canelo Alvarez did indeed go the distance with John Ryder. John Ryder is tough as hell. What were your thoughts on what happened? And we'll get into what's next for Canelo, which we kind of already did a video for if you haven't already checked it out. But what were your thoughts on everything that you saw this weekend?
The parlays, man. I'm not gonna get over that. Thankfully I don't bet too much. But what I will say is, and for people who end up watching this, we started right at 1. We probably should have waited a few minutes, but we'll let some people trickle in. It's all good. Because late arriving crowd, I apparently know all about that, Shantelle, is what I would say.
Are you always late or something like that?
No, that's a Heat Knicks joke. So basically. Canelo Alvarez, I didn't think he looked great, and this is the 3rd consecutive fight where I'm kind of like, doesn't quite look elite in the same way that I feel like he has throughout his peak, which leads me to the question of what we're going to talk about is he past his peak, right? The last great start to finish, although he got off to a slow start, but you'll get what I'm saying. Performance he had was, I thought, against Caleb Plant in 2011. 2022, he obviously lost to Dmitry Bivol, a fight that in hindsight, I wasn't sure that he was really in like that. I mean, it was kind of close in the beginning, but at the scorecards, I was looking at them again. There was some 115, 113s, and I didn't think it was that. I thought Bivol won maybe 9 rounds instead of just 7, right? And beyond that, he has the fight against Gennady Golovkin, which he dominates early on, but it kind of looked like because Triple G was older, and then Canelo fades, loses his energy, so to speak, and Gennady Golovkin wins some rounds at the end, making it like a closer fight than it actually appeared. Even though Canelo to me won maybe 8 rounds to 4.
Yeah.
I saw some 7-5s going around. We were texting about that. And Bivol's another fight that though he gassed out early. And then the John Ryder thing, it looked like he was going to put him away a couple different times, right in the range we were talking about, 5-8, 7-9. It looked like round 7 there was an opening, and I was like, oh man, we're both going to nail this, right? I was thinking that as I'm watching the fight, and then I'm like, oh, John Ryder's fighting back. Credit to his toughness. Canelo is not as sharp defensively. Is not throwing a lot of combinations, because it was a lot of like just sort of jab, overhand right with no setup. And toward the end, I thought he gave John Ryder a couple rounds. I had Canelo winning, I believe, 117, 110, something along those lines. He did get the 1 knockdown, but just 3 fights in a row where I'm like, I'm not really sure. And maybe he just looks like a guy who's in his 18th year as a pro, entering his mid 30s. And while he's still the best super middleweight in the world right now, he looks more vulnerable than he has, I feel like.
Yeah, and as for Canelo, like you're saying you weren't impressed with him. I don't think he fought badly. Like there were moments in that fight where I was like, "Oh man, John Ryder is really landing that uppercut really easily in this fight on Canelo." But at the same time, I don't think he fought badly. I think the biggest issue is we tend to forget that at 168, he's not a natural 168er. So even then, how are we expecting his power to translate? I don't think it's translating. Like he fought Avni Yildirim or whatever. Like, yeah, that's a guy he's gonna stop. Right? Like we knew that right away. That was a guy that he was gonna stop. But for a guy like John Ryder, who is naturally used to fighting bigger guys, Canelo is a smaller guy. And so I think we have to take that into consideration as well. Like, has Canelo's power translated? Because I don't think it was a bad fight. I had it scored, 10 rounds to Canelo, 2 rounds to John Ryder. And if I was being a little bit nicer and like a little bit more generous, I'd maybe give 3 rounds to John Ryder. However, I thought Canelo, for the most part, he had a good performance. He just didn't have the performance that everyone wanted him to have. And that was him stopping or knocking out John Ryder cold. And there definitely was some moments. And in that 5th round, I remember like when John Ryder got stunned, I was like, man, Canelo needs to go at him hard. But John Ryder, after he got dropped, he just went harder at Canelo. And I thought it was really impressive on John Ryder's end. He is extremely tough, and he's one of those guys that is a tricky fighter. He's a pressure fighter. And at one point going into this fight, I was like, yo, it's just going to be target practice for Canelo. But John Ryder fought very, very well. But look at his face at the end. His face was messed up. Right? So it's like, what are we actually saying? Is Canelo past his prime? I just don't know if this was the perfect fight for him to pick.
Are expectations too high for Canelo, you think?
Of
At this point?
course.
Okay.
Dude, like, and that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, is he past his prime? Yeah, I don't think this is the Canelo from a few years ago, but this guy has over 60 professional fights. Like in boxing world, in boxing ages, the man's like 75 years old. You know what I mean? Like, he's old. He's got over 60 professional fights. And I don't actually think he fought bad. I just believe that, number one, he's not a natural 168er. And at the same time, it's like he was coming back from wrist surgery. He hadn't fought in 7 months. Like, we're used to at one point seeing Canelo fight like 3-4 times a year. Right? This was his longest layoff. And actually, he was supposed to take a longer layoff. Like in that interview, post-fight interview, when he fought Gennady Golovkin, there was talk that he was actually going to be fighting in September. Right? He said he was going to take more time off. So he came back sooner. And let's also think about the high elevation as well, where he was fighting. Like, I'm not making excuses for Canelo, but it was hot as hell, and the higher elevation as well that he's not used to fighting at.
My thing was also, once I saw the tiny ring, that ring was small. I don't remember if somebody said it was 18 by 18, but it was a small ring. It reminded me of Tim Tszyu versus Tony Harrison. We're going into the fight. It's like, oh man, like I thought Tony Harrison had a chance. Once I saw how small the ring was, it was like, oh no, because this is designed for Tim Tszyu to be able to cut off the ring easier, corner him, trap him, and eventually stop him, which is exactly what happened. Doesn't allow Tony Harrison to box, and somebody who would need to use the ring wasn't able to use the ring. The same thing here, where I thought Canelo Alvarez, knowing that John Ryder was going to need to use his movement here, would potentially just pressure him and have more success. And it didn't appear that way at times. And like, again, he fought well, right? Like, we asked on a community poll, which got, I don't know how many votes, a bunch, but what would you grade Canelo's performance? In the A's, B's, C's, or a straight up F?
Like
right?
a B. I'd give him a B.
To me, it was like C plus, because I feel like, maybe C, because I feel like that's a guy, John Ryder, who you're not just going to put away easily. But with the small ring, you being Canelo Alvarez, and I understand like he's not naturally a super middleweight, but I think the openings were there. And then he ended up, it's also defensively for me, like he was getting touched up
A lot,
and he wasn't as sharp defensively as he normally was, which to me is worrisome as we project for his future, the Dmitry Bivol rematch, which he really wants, which, okay. And then the potential of maybe a David Benavidez coming into the picture.
Well, let's get right into that then, as in terms of who Canelo wants to see next, because he's been pretty adamant about wanting to avenge that loss against Dmitry Bivol. Personally, I think it goes the exact same way. Now, Canelo said in that post-fight interview he wants it on the same terms. So he wants it at 175. Bivol's like, yo, let's do it at 168. You can put your belts on the line. Because Bivol knows how this is going to go, right? But at the same time, like, we haven't seen Bivol fight for a long time as well. So if they do have this fight in September, which is very likely, that'll be almost a year since Bivol has fought, or something along the lines of that. We'll have to look that up. I know you're the note guy. You took some notes, so maybe you can double check that for me. But that would be a long time since Bivol would have fought. So that's the thing. It's like, I think Canelo is going to want to avenge his loss against Bivol. I think the David Benavidez fight is the fight that fans want to see, though. I mean, this is the fight that would bring all eyes to boxing. And I think, like, there was some parts in that David Benavidez Caleb Plant fight where I was like, yo, David Benavidez does this against Canelo, it's a wrap, right? There were some moments. I think Benavidez has a chance to beat Canelo, but I think Canelo still has a very good chance to beat David Benavidez, and this would be the time to fight him because you don't want David Benavidez to get better and Canelo to get older.
I'll tell you what, Shantelle. This is closer to a 50-50 fight to me today than it was a week ago.
Yeah, it seems like
because
it seems like you feel like Canelo has fallen off for sure.
no, not falling off, but like again, I'm gonna reiterate what I said before when we talked about this initially. With David Benavidez, I would not call him the favorite in a hypothetical Canelo Alvarez fight. What I would say though, Shantelle, is David Benavidez profiles as the guy who, historically in boxing, this is the guy who comes along and takes the stuff of whoever's the champion, right? He's younger. He's maybe faster at this juncture. He's, I would say, stronger because he's a natural super middleweight and he's actually missed weight a couple times. He's probably going to be a future light heavyweight in all likelihood, right? Versus Canelo Alvarez, who started his career at 154 and is trying to like actually win a title at light heavyweight. Like David Benavidez has a lot of height, reach. His stamina is great, right? He has a lot of physical advantages over Canelo Alvarez, who is starting to age a little more, who's going to be 33 years old this summer, who is in year 18 of his career. Like, David Benavidez is somebody who profiles as the type of guy who would win this fight, who, as an underdog, I'd be curious to see what the odds would be in this hypothetical. Yeah, like I'd be curious and maybe even put money on David Benavidez. Like I could really talk myself into it.
I don't think you're alone in that, though. I think a lot of people think David Benavidez would beat Canelo, but I just think Canelo still has a really good chance to beat David Benavidez. But the longer that Canelo lets this go on, David Benavidez gets more fights and gets better, right? And then you're finding a guy that is more polished. And as you mentioned, he is getting older. And the thing about it is, Canelo could ride off into the sunset if he wanted to. And this is the most interesting part about this whole who is Canelo going to fight next? Because we know he's going to fight Bivol. Whether we want it or not, he's going to try to avenge that loss against Bivol, and Canelo wants it on the same terms. And if it's going to be anything like the first fight, and if Canelo is going to look like how he did against John Ryder, Bivol's going to get that dub. And I don't know what that's going to say about his legacy, but I do give mad props to Canelo because he's got heart to want to go take that fight again. David Benavidez is the most interesting one. The fans want to see that one. We know how good David Benavidez is, and he's young, and he's going to be next up in that division, and everybody knows it. And then there's a guy that's, from your area. He's also Puerto Rican, and he signed to matchroom Edgar Berlanga. And there is a road for Edgar Berlanga to fight Canelo Alvarez. I also think that's a fight that we could possibly see. And I think it's more likely that Canelo fights Bivol and possibly loses. I would say that he would lose to Bivol, and then maybe fights Edgar Berlanga, beats Edgar Berlanga, and rides off into the sunset.
Can I give you my dream scenario that will not play out?
I mean, sure, it's your show too. Do whatever you like. You don't gotta ask me, man.
Thank you. The dream scenario for me that will not happen is if we're playing matchmaker, which we will do on the next segment we're about to get to also. Canelo Alvarez fights David Benavidez in September. The co-feature is Edgar Berlanga versus John Ryder, who wanted to fight each other before, did not happen. Now it's easier to make that fight because they're both in matchroom, right? You can make that happen easily. And then Cinco de Mayo weekend in 2024, Canelo fights presumably the winner, presumably Edgar Berlanga, assuming he wins that fight against John Ryder, right? And that's also assuming Edgar Berlanga wins his fight next month against Jason Quigley.
Yeah,
that would be my dream scenario. Or if Benavidez wins that fight, then you can get Benavidez versus Berlanga somehow. Showtime and DAZN come together. You can make that happen. They just made Tank Garcia. Like they'll make fights, right? Like it's just a matter of getting everyone together and making that happen. But I do think we're gonna see Bivol Canelo too. I'm not really interested. I would like Bivol to defend his title and then fight Artur Beterbiev in the unification that we all want to see for undisputed at light heavyweight. However, if I'm Dmitry Bivol, yeah, I want to fight Canelo again, beat him again, and make a lot of money. Why the hell not? Like,
yeah, why not? Why not? That's going to be a big payday for him. And also, when I take a look at that path, like, I think that's something everyone wants to see as well. But I think at the same time, there might be a slight chance, even though Canelo doesn't have to. I think there is a slight chance that we could see that David Benavidez fight, because we know one thing: at this point, Canelo's fighting for legacy. That's why he wants to fight Bivol again. He's fighting for legacy. So I think there's a chance we might get it, but at the same time, he doesn't have to go that route, because he can easily go fight Bivol again, lose to Bivol, come back, fight Edgar Berlanga, and sail off into the sunset if he wanted to. And I think that will be probably most likely from what we're going to see from Canelo. And